Another week of some incredible prints hitting the tape. You can see here this Apple won $2.3 million in premium out the money as well for the 280 strike, and this expires in about 2 or so weeks, flagged as highly unusual here in the system. This one was pretty unusual, and then this other one here, very close in proximity in terms of time. You can see only 3 minutes is the difference between both of these. It was $1.1 million in premium for the 240 strike for Amazon, by the way, for the January expiration. So bulls are still very strong in terms of flow. And if we go to the chart, we can see it's been continuous upside ever since this bottoming print over here. And actually around this time, we saw a lot of tech calls suddenly hit the tape on the exact low, or around the hour that the exact low occurred. And it's been tech buying ever since. If you remember, guys, there was a ton of bearish flow, tons of puts all the way back here during that downside. And then immediately at these lows, before people even knew it was a major low that was forming, a bunch of tech calls at the tape, and it's been up ever since. So a key level that has to hold going forward, if I go to the daily chart here, actually the hourly might be a bit easier to show you, is this uptrend I've been talking about for the past couple weeks in these videos. Goes all the way back to the August 1st major low that formed, and then the entire uptrend that came as a result of that has held this level until it broke down below. You could see it retested over here on this crazy day where we had the huge gap up and gap and crap set up, and then it rejected, fell down, but now we have officially reclaimed it on both the daily as well as the weekly chart. So going forward, bulls need to hold it above roughly 574 to 576. As long as they can do that, you're going to see something like a retest and go, or honestly, based on how strong it is right now and how many people got off sides because of this candle over here, which I'll get into in a second, it's probably just going to continue to grind higher in the short term. Maybe with the news this weekend of Venezuela, we'll see something like a mini gap down and continuation maybe later in the week. But as of now, as long as it stays over, like I said, 674 to 676, this will continue to bid. Now, the one thing I do want to mention, like I just said, is this bait setup on the daily. And what I mean by bait is this candle we've now seen a couple times since 2023 where it results in some form of a short squeeze to the upside. And basically what happened on Thursday of last week is we had a very bearish candle, hard rejection from that uptrend I just showed you guys, and it closed very bearish as well. It actually engulfed the previous 2-day candles as well. Now, the problem that emerges, at least for bears with a candle like this, is if bulls are able to support it in the subsequent days of that week. So you see here on Friday it was able to bid, and then Monday a gap up and go. That creates a squeeze problem for them because a lot of hedges are added after a candle like this. Typically, this is a precursor, at least technical analysis 101, precursor to more downside, except in this case, bulls were able to hold it at the level that it closed at and above that level as well. So this turns into a squeeze potential. And we saw the exact same thing over here, October 10th, as we saw from this candle, very similar in terms of its bearishness, closed at the lows, and the following day gapped up and it was able to hold above that level going forward and continued much higher. We're likely going to see something very similar in this case where you see continuation to all-time high plus as a result of this squeeze. It's just a question of if it wants to come back down and retest this reclaim of the uptrend, or if it just wants to continue from here. So that's something I wanted to mention to you guys. Always very important to watch these candles if price is able to maintain immediately after around the level that it closed and above that level, just like both of these times. And in both cases, you did see a continuation of the uptrend. There's plenty of other examples now since 2023 that are fairly similar as well. So another thing I do want to mention, if we go over to X, is the non-stop call buying on the S&P 500 this entire way up, and it still is prevalent going into the weekend and now going into this next week. You could see 2.9 billion worth of gamma exposure at the 680 level, and this was all the way at the time it was trading. Let's see here. It was actually trading at 680 at the time with the spot price. You could see there 2.9 billion. And then as time went on, you can see a bunch more call prints, rip your face off tech rally, as the Twitter flow account said, a bunch of QQ calls with a 630 strike that expired in about a month or so. And then as you go up here, this huge NVDA call leap that was added. I'll get into that in a second. And then as I scroll up, you can see with another gamma post that the following day, they actually added more at the 685 strike. There was 1.4 billion in overall gamma exposure at that level. And as time went on, 2 billion then 45 minutes later at the 685 level. So it's just continuous grind higher. You see a certain gamma level like this, in this case, the 685. We saw it with 680. We saw it with 675 as well, where it just keeps accumulating more and more exposure to the point that it acts as a magnet and you see price climb into it where it has to satisfy that level at least. And then even more exposure happens again at the new strike a little bit higher. Maybe 690 will be next coming up this week. It's something to watch for, especially if that exposure continues to climb thereafter, because again, like I said, it can act as a magnet. Now, going back down, funny thing here, if you didn't see this, Jim Cramer flipped bearish on Bitcoin 7 days ago, and this ended up being the exact low before a 15% rally afterwards. It actually was almost the exact low intraday as well. It was the exact low on the day, and then it was off by like an hour or so from when the exact low happened intraday. So incredible how the inverse Cramer works consistently as well. But if I scroll back down over to here, the big one that I want to talk about is this NVIDIA call leap that was added. You see the turtle meme here, the 300 strike, and NVIDIA was trading at 180 at the time that they bought it. So going back to Cheddarflow, and really quick before I go over to that NVIDIA print, today is the last day of Cheddarflow's Black Friday sale. You can get 40% off after you already have a free trial. So this is the last day, the best sale of the year as well. If you are kind of on the edge, your last chance before midnight tonight. So wanted to bring that to your attention. Now, going over to NVIDIA, we can see that print right here, 2.6 million for the 300 strike at the 180 about spot price. And this expires in 2028. So there is a lot of time on that. And some people see this as kind of irrelevant because it's so far away. However, something with this far out the money of a strike on something that is now a bloated stock compared to where it was last year and the previous year, etc., is actually a very substantial bet just because it is so far away from that strike. Obviously, it doesn't have to hit the strike for them to be profitable. However, still something super unusual. Definitely going to continue to watch the flow here if we see more of these leaps, whether it's 2027, 2028, etc., with a lot of activity on these farther strikes. And incredible that the open interest on the 300 strike is 70,000. That's insane. Obviously, some of that has to be hedging just because of how big NVIDIA is at this point, an entire AI race, etc. But pretty incredible. 70,000 is the open interest on something so far away in terms of the strike as well as the expiration on it. So wanted to bring that to your attention as well as some of these dark pool prints that we saw last week on NVIDIA. You could see here 476 million, 476 million, another 476 million, all back to back to back, spread out between an hour or so. These are decent amount of premium behind it, all at the 177 spot price. So if we go over to the chart, this is actually where price closed on Friday, and those were executed before the close as well. So very key level going forward that should act as a support/resistance. And if you guys have been watching these videos the past couple of weeks, you know I mentioned this head and shoulder pattern on NVIDIA going into earnings as well as out of earnings after we had that gap up. This ended up being a gap and crap day. And despite the rest of the market continuing to grind higher after this gap and crap day, like I showed you on SPY earlier, it has been unable to follow. And so far, this looks very bearish to me. So you want to make sure that there is some type of invalidation level. In this case is around 196, but otherwise, as close as you can get to 196, it looks like a good risk reward short setup. And we even saw an unusual call from last week, which got burned based on theta. If you remember in the last Sunday video, they were unable to have a continuation higher above my 193.02 level. You could see that acted as a rejection spot 3 days, almost 3 days in a row in this case. So until it gets back above here, this is kind of what I'm looking at. Just give you a rough sketch. We have the head and shoulder. If it can get back above 193.02, you're probably going to see upside to retest somewhere in the 190 to 195, 96 range. Above that, you're going to see a new all-time high. Honestly, based on how it looks right now, maybe you see one more rejection and then it's going to attempt a little bit lower from there. This is something where if 174.15 breaks decisively, which it was able to act as a support twice on the daily over here, you're going to see much more downside all the way back down into the 150s thereafter in a very quick order, and probably fill this gap over here at 163.74 from this big gap update that it had back in July. So this is a pretty substantial distribution setup up here. This entire thing will act as distribution if 174.15 breaks decisively. So that's the level bulls definitely want to hold, and they did their best last week in holding it, but it is pretty weak relative to how the market's performing. We have this big head and shoulder, and obviously we know its valuation is very bloated. Now, it doesn't mean that it can't continue to go higher in the long term, but sometimes it takes a bit of a correcting to have that happen. And of course, if this happened to NVIDIA, it is the largest component in the S&P 500, I think about 8%, at least before earnings it was, you would expect that to have an effect on the general market. However, some of the other components are very strong right now. For example, Google has been absolutely ripping since all the way back in the summer months. You can see gap up after gap up and just continuation much higher all the way to 320. And we actually saw, if I go to X really quick here, even more Google calls get added. As you can see in this post, 1 million for the 315 strike, just a little bit in the money for the 116.26, as well as 500,000 above that, 2.2 million in premium, pretty deep in the money for that one, but still a lot of call flow hitting the tape on this, starting to take away from some of that call flow we saw earlier in the year on NVIDIA, as well as Tesla, which are normally the biggest in terms of not only their momentum, but the amount of prints that they receive intraday. And I believe one of the posts up here as well showed that Google took the top spot. Yeah, you can see here, took the throne, as this post says, of the most bullish flow intraday. I believe this was Wednesday of last week, 92.5 million in premium, which is actually a lot for Google. We're used to seeing this amount, like around 100 million for a big day on Tesla or NVIDIA, like I just mentioned, but Google now is starting to receive some of those flows since they are breaking out in this AI race. So pretty incredible things happening in the market right now. Other than that, as always, appreciate you guys watching this video. I'll see you next time.